It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations in the electric current, which are directly proportional to the variations in the light beam. The sound track. As the varying electrical current in the photoelectric cell is small, a vacuum tube amplifier is required to increase it to the point where it will operate a loudspeaker. Sound track.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. I'm very excited to finally get to this episode. I've been working on this for a few weeks. It was somebody that me and Lisa both came across when we were... honestly, at this point, I don't even remember when we first came across the guy. Maybe it was occultists in history or whatever. But we did come across him working on something else, and we both thought that this person was definitely going to need an episode, if not two, on just the man himself, Michael Myers. And I really didn't want to sell short, I think, how important or how much of an impact he had in occult history or in the occult world. So here we are with part one of a two-part series on Michael Myers, or Count Michael Myers, however I guess people want to call him. Thank you very much again, Lisa, as usual, for coming on and doing this topic. I thought it was very eye-opening, very interesting. I even do, and I know I said this to you, and I think you might have agreed as well. I was even wondering, how much did the movie The Ninth Gate play off of kind of like Michael Myers and the emblems and stuff?
Very much so.
I do wonder, I do think, actually, that this man may have had a huge, huge impact in occultism, and some of his deeper stuff, I think, is, still being used in a sense, and just people don't even realize because they don't even know who this man is himself.
Yeah. He was almost like the occultist, like a musician's musician. Only people who really were into it know of but he's not at the forefront of everyone's brain. Yes,
yeah. I mean, I joked, and I think I put it out maybe in on Twitter or whatever, but I'm going to admit it, sometimes I do listen to some ICP, and that's because I do think they're actually occultists. Believe it or not, I think those clowns are not dumb. And in one of their songs, the guy, one of the rappers says, Michael Myers Psycho Ciphers or something like that, or Psycho Ciphers Michael Myers. And it's the thing is, this guy was also associated with people who had ciphers, or he was into ciphers himself. So
right.
To hear somebody say that, it's just was that just a play off of other people thinking Michael Myers from Halloween? Not realizing he meant Michael Myers that we're talking about here today.
Right.
Was Michael Myers from Halloween even kind of, associated with that? Very weird, because I do think that, I've made the claims before. I do think a lot of that stuff, those Halloween movies and a lot of horror movies, I do think is occult symbolism. So you have to go back, and it just makes me wonder. The way that we're pretty much going to cover this, kind of go through a little bit of his history, kind of show, I think, the people he had associations with, people he, talked to, corresponded with, he wrote letters to, kind of maybe give you an idea of the people that he was kind of surrounded with and had spoken to. I think that's very impressive in itself and just very interesting. And then, then go through some of his books in chronological order for the most part. I might skip over Atalanta. How do you even say that last part again?
Fugiens?
Yeah, right.
Atalanta
Makes
Fugiens.
me think of the Fugees. But
yeah, it's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, the Fugiens. Yeah, we're going to cover that one on its own in part 2.
Right.
You know, I'm assuming with this first part, we'll probably get into him and some of the people that he was associated with, and maybe even some of his books. And then the second part will be continuing off some of his books and then focusing straight on that other book. And it's, to me, kind of almost like with the book, with the Scivias that Hildegard did. I very much do think that this was almost kind of, and I'm going to say it when I go through my notes, I do think this is very much of like multimedia in its early stages, or already was back then with the technology that they had.
Right.
Because, like, you know, this book is supposed to, you know, will have music that is supposed to be played. I'm not going to get into it now, but I even think there was like specified like certain ways the music is supposed to be done for people, different directions, you know, stuff like that, an emblem, things to read or things to meditate on. It was just very, there's a lot to it, you know, and I think that's very impressive considering the times. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'll pull up, this is Count Michael Maier right here. This is a copper engraving of Michael Maier from, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this book's name, but it's from 1617. One thing I will add, I think if I'm correct, this says Matthias Marion. That is who did the copper engraving. And I do think he did the copper engravings for the Atalanta book. And he is somebody that him and Robert Flood might be people that we might cover in the future too, because I think it's interesting how, you know, not to go on too much about this, but I do think it's interesting how, like, you'll have these occult books, but sometimes these engravings or these drawings are not even done by the person who authored it. So then it's like, okay, so there's actually, like, this person who drew this, I mean, were they another occultist? Who were they associated with? What were they doing? You know, so it's like another person that's actually associated with the book that you really don't even know much about. Right. And I do think Matthias Marion, if I'm even saying it right, that's who did the engravings for a lot of his stuff. Yeah, so Michael Maier was a German physician and counselor to Rudolf II of Habsburg. He was a learned alchemist, epigrammist, and amateur composer. He was born in the summer of 1569. I thought that was great. And I was like, oh, my man was born in the summer of 69.
There you go, already.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like...
Like, did he do it on purpose?
Yeah,
After
you're done with this series, you might be like, man, you know, maybe these jokes were real, you know, serious. But, like, you start to wonder, really, how much stuff is referenced back to people that we literally have no idea about or we forgot about that had a huge impact on occultism. All right, so get back to it. He was born in the summer of 1569 in the vicinity of Kiel, in which at the time was an ethnically German province of Denmark on the northern border of the Holy Roman Empire. He is the son of a specialist in beadwork and embroidery named Peter Maier. He studied philosophy and medicine at Rostock, Frankfurt, and Padua from 1595 to 1596. Maier left Padua abruptly after getting involved in a fight, injuring the other party and being arrested, supposedly. The arrested part I hear here and there on different people's opinions. Yeah. He went on to the University of Basel, where he obtained a doctorate in medicine in October of 1596. His doctoral thesis, De Epilepsia, was dedicated to Matthias Cornarius. I'm not exactly sure who that is, but somebody he dedicated it to. Maier then returned to Holstein to practice medicine. Around in 1599, he became interested in alchemy and attempted to create an alchemical concordance, synthesizing the works of different authors. Some say, and this is somebody else that I find very interesting, and actually I know we're going to cover this person, probably the next person we cover. Some say he was inspired by the works of Marsilio Ficino, a central figure in the Florentine revival of Platonism and Hermeticism. Ficino translated the recently discovered Corpus Hermeticum into Latin and revived the Greek idea of Egyptian Hermes as the great sage of the Egyptians and contemporary of Moses. He was an astrologer, a reviver of Neoplatonism, in touch with the major academics of his day, and the first translator of Plato's complete works into Latin.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think there was like stuff that he did that also because like he wanted to make it easier for people to have like debates on the work, or to be able to like really like people can
discuss
talk about
and have a discord about it.
Yes. Now back to Michael. In 1608, Michael went to Prague, and on September 19th, 1609, he formally entered the service of Rudolf II as his physician and imperial counselor. 10 days later, Rudolf raised him to hereditary nobility and gave him the title of Imperial Count Palatine. He was granted a coat of arms which depicted a bird bonded together with a frog by a golden chain. The interest of the emperor in the occult was the reason for the high esteem from Maier. So, I mean, the guy basically was interested in him because of his occultism.
Right.
However, by April 1611, Rudolph's political position had substantially deteriorated, and he was more or less imprisoned in his castle in Prague. So, and then if you get into the coat of arms, right, Lisa?
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you a little bit of background first before we go into the coat of arms that I think is kind of important to kind of show what's going on in the background. So like you mentioned, a little bit is repetitive, and then I'll tell you why I'm repeating it a little bit. So you have Maier's father dying when he's young. So that already sets the stage, for instability. And like you mentioned, he studied medicine and philosophy in Germany. But he realized that since he was very interested in philosophy, that he was going to have to find patronage in order to pursue those interests, because he wasn't going to become, like a medical doctor to where he can support himself.
Yeah. He needed sponsors.
There you go. Yeah. I approve this message. Yeah. And so as you mentioned also, he doesn't receive his degree in Padua because of the fight, and he ends up getting expelled like in his final year. Like he was almost done, and then he gets kicked out. So he subsequently moves to Switzerland and attends the University of Basel, like you said, getting the degree in medicine. And the reason I repeat all this is to kind of emphasize the constant moving around and instability. And you see in Maier's work that he's wanting to create order out of this constant change. And so you see kind of like in the background of everything, this alchemical movement of a man, right? Like as he progresses through life.
Order out of chaos.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So in 1601, one of the kind of the foundational parts of Maier was that he was able to gain access to literature on ancient philosophy and alchemy, mainly through one of his patients that had a library. And it ends up sparking his interest in these areas. So here, Maier discovers Pythagorean thought in the library of the patients and becomes heavily influenced by it. And you see the Pythagorean thought throughout most of his work. And in the library where he's reading about all this stuff, Maier begins to catalog the material according to Pythagorean ideology and like all his numbers. So he like becomes obsessed with trying to organize all of this literature on it. And like you mentioned, Ficino also was extremely influential on Maier, and he also, aside from the Neoplatonism, he was also resurrecting Pythagoreanism during the Renaissance. So he also contributed to Neo-Pythagoreanism, aside from the Neoplatonism. So he was, also influential, which of course would be. So, and again, Pythagorean theory was the mathematical basis, and you'll see that in the Atalanta Fugiens and mainly in the Fugiens, but it pretty much encompasses all of the basis of Maier's books. And then some scholars say that some of these emblems or some of these things that he put in some of these books were mixed up. I don't know how true that is. Some scholars say it is, some say it doesn't. I think a lot of it was that they're trying to show that Maier was making people work for the knowledge through his work. So, like you mentioned with Rudolf in Prague in 1608, Maier's already 40 years old at this point, and he goes to this area, and the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II is the great patron of alchemy at the time and of European princes. So Rudolf is a magnet for alchemists, magicians, Kabbalists, and so hence why he goes there. So from then on in Maier's timeline, in the background, you see the beginning or basically the Rosicrucian manifestos being published. So this is a new thing that just all of a sudden comes about out of nowhere, or they say out of nowhere. And it happens early 17th century, and it coincides with the beginning of Maier publishing his work. And then he starts publishing subjects on similar topics as well. But even with all that going on, you have that kind of climaxing towards the 30 Years' War, the Bohemian Revolt, which is like 1618, 1648, happening in the background. And you're seeing Europe with enormous amount of turmoil, a lot of religious warfare. Luther releases his thesis on it, Protestant Reformation against the Catholics, Catholic Church trying to reestablish itself, and then royalty trying to claw back, some of its, loss of power. So with all of this going on in the background, Maier's trying to figure out how he fits in, right? How do I make sense of the world? What is religion's role? How do we perceive ourselves? And you have the first publication from him, De Medicina Regia Heroica, and it's kind of autobiographical, but you get this sense that he's trying to look for direction, or that he has this need for structure. And so it kind of basically is the foundation of everything that's built upon from Maier at that point. So going to the coat of arms that you mentioned that Rudolph had granted him, it's going to be a fusion, and Count Michael Maier, it's a fusion of his hereditary crest with the Hermetic symbolism divided. And so Emperor Rudolph had a special respect, like you said, for Maier and his knowledge. And so the family coat of arms was essentially augmented by the emperor, which I think is a huge honor for anybody really at that time. And it includes on one half a tree trunk with 3 branches, and on the other a toad bound by a chain to a flying eagle. So the latter symbolizes volatile, non-volatile substances, and potentially taken from the alchemical treatise of Ibn Sina. I think that's how you pronounce it. And it can be seen in Maier's Symbola Aurea Mensae. He also receives the title of Imperial Count Palatine by the Emperor, and a Count Palatine was the imperial officer who exercised a sort of supervision over universities, and they basically were able to grant doctorates to finishing students out of universities, as well as the titles of poet laureate. They get the highest level of award for their poetry. But regarding the flying eagle above the toad connected by a thin thread, the toad is the symbol of the prima materia in medieval alchemical symbolism, correct? And then together,
makes you wonder about the Mason Jobulon figure, with the cat and the
yes, that's true. Yeah.
When I came across that, it made me think about that.
It does. I think it has all of that essence, right? Maybe not directly, but you get that feel from it. And then together with the eagle and the toad, they represent the dense, volatile duality. And then sitting up atop is the golden ring. Is a dove with a golden ring. And it's indicating the completion of great work, which I think at the time was interchangeable with the phoenix symbolism. So, yeah.
I get that. Makes sense. Awesome. All right. So on to the next slide. This is very interesting, and I think this, I'll be getting into it, but I think this might be like a person that you can see how he might have had something to do with influencing Rosicrucianism. Because I think when I get into it, the area that I think Rosicrucianism, or the idea of it sort of getting popular, was kind of like within this guy's area. And Michael Maier was associated with him too, so who knows. But Maier left, and eventually he started corresponding with Maurice of, I don't even know if I'm saying this right, Cassel. Maurice of Hessel of Hesse-Kassel, or German Moritz, also called Maurice the Learned, or Moritz, was the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, or Hesse-Kassel, in the Holy Roman Empire from 1592 to 1627. Although Maurice had been raised in the Lutheran faith, he converted to Calvinism in 1605. And that was even something that you had mentioned before about, like, Lutheranism. And you're even saying, I guess, like, maybe Michael trying to figure out where he fit in. Even just, like, covering some of the people that he was associated with, it's like some people were into Calvinism. Some people did not like Calvinism. Like, you can even see him associating, I think, with people that wouldn't necessarily even care for, like, his other associates.
Yeah.
So I did find that interesting,
Yeah.
But yeah, he converted to Calvinism in 1605, and with the law, and I'm going to mess this word up, cuius regio, ius religio, whatever, basically someone with the power to tell you what to believe.
Oh, wow.
So, like, this guy converted over to Calvinism and had the power to tell the people in his land that they had to believe that as well. Maurice's subjects were also required to convert to Calvinism. Maurice tried to introduce Calvinism to the lands, which he had inherited from the extinct Hesse-Marburg branch of his family. Such a change of faith was contrary to the inherent rules and resulted in an ongoing conflict with the Hesse-Darmstadt branch. It also brought him into conflict with the Holy Roman Emperor Matthias. According to author Peter Dawkins, in 1615, Moritz founded the Societas Christiana, which functioned as a branch or a chapter of the Rosy Cross. Michael Maier was a member. It's been said that the court of Moritz was foremost center of patron for the occult sciences in Germany prior to the 30 Years' War. It has also been described as exceeding the court of Rudolf II in regard to the strength of its focus on the occult arts and the extent of its prince's personal involvement in occult projects. So they were getting down there with occultism, I think.
Yeah.
On the 16th of March, Maier wrote a letter to Moritz from Torgau explaining his dilemma, whether he should wait in Torgau or make his way to Kassel, and setting forth his plea for the opportunity to demonstrate his knowledge in person. There are many vulgar writers and practitioners, Maier writes, who lie as far from the truth as the earth does from the sky.
I love that.
Yeah. Then he adds a description of an alchemical ladder with 18 steps in which Maier is now climbing. I think, there we go, I screwed that up. I confess, and here are the 18 steps here. I confess there are 18 steps of the ladder to gold-bearing peak, or to the final perfection of the art. And the greatest effort is required to move step by step from the lowest to the highest rung. And in truth, that ladder has been placed beyond the view of the vulgar writers and practitioners, and thus almost none of them will have reached the first step, much less the second or third, and still less the higher, since the subsequent steps cannot be overcome without preceding steps, and the preceding steps without the last of all our little benefit. Ascending these steps from the lowest to the highest, I have overcome 16, God be praised, and standing before the 17th, or penultimate step, I preserve further. Maier appended a table to this letter illustrating the 18 steps of the ladder of which he spoke. Some say Maier paved the way for his eventual entrance into the court of Moritz by dedicating a book to him in August of 1616, entitled De Circulo Physio Quattro, whatever, on the squaring of the natural circle. Drawing on Pythagorean ideas in numerology of Plato's Timaeus, Maier explains to Moritz in his foreword that there are certain hidden bonds which maintain the harmony of the universe, those between God, the sun, the human heart, and the hidden power of gold, which correspond to each other in their mutual change. Between God and the sun, we are told there exists an interval of 1 octave. Between the sun and gold, there are 4 intervals, and between the human heart and God, there are 8. So, all right.
Yeah, it seems like for Maier, the mere act of understanding and deciphering alchemical allegory would lead the practitioner up this initiatory ladder, so to speak. And the ladder, like you mentioned, is 18 steps, would lead to perfection, or essence of the Philosopher's Stone. So he makes reference that lead is the prima materia, again going back to the prima materia on a practical level. And he also identifies with Saturn in terms of like the spiritual level, and talks about how you have to have 3, and we'll get into that a little later in terms of alchemy. You see a lot of the influences again in the whole Pythagoras idea, structure and numbers. You see Paracelsus ideology here, to where, and Paracelsus basically talked about that you had to work in a specific way, and he explained it with great detail, that where nature ends, man must begin, continuing the work, and you see that with that 18 steps. Prima materia, unrefined material or matter, taking that in the practical sense and then changing it, or in the human spirit, taking that in the spiritual sense, further on. But with the first step, the Scopus Artis, which is the first step in the alchemical ladder, it's basically knowing the purpose of the art, why you're doing it, what is the purpose, your why, right? You hear that a lot with, motivational speech, know your why. And you
know your
also
intention.
Know your intention, right? Exactly. And so, and he had this insistence of self-awareness, that you had to have a particular degree of self-knowledge. And so to me, it kind of is like, that's your first step. If you don't even are aware of yourself, wait till you know yourself first, or be self-aware, and then start. It kind of seemed like you needed to do all this work, and then basically now I can move on to this. And then that the art must not be vulgar. I think he was, like you had said, he was very specific about things not being vulgar, and doing the work and getting your hands dirty. And you see a central theme of that practice, theory, and spiritual is needed for alchemy, and that you need to be not just doing the practical, you needed all 3, but you needed to get your hands dirty, and you need to know why you were doing it, and you need to completely invest everything of yourself in that whole process. And so, yeah, the 18 steps kind of, gets at the heart of the whole, doing the work, getting your hands dirty, and the whole 3 aspects of alchemy. And that, not only that, but like that you, aside from, having to work for it, you had to be able to have the ability to decipher what you're doing, like in alchemy. Like you had to have that intelligence with it. And if you didn't, you just didn't level up the level, the 18 steps. So
what I find interesting with his stuff, especially like the way you're putting it too now, which I love that you're doing it like this.
Okay, good.
His him and other people that we'll eventually cover, and I think we've kind of covered in the past actually with the alchemy. They are under the mindset that this is a spiritual change, an alchemical change within oneself, and I think when he kind of shows like his alchemical stuff, it's almost like he's referring to the same thing, and I'm pretty sure he pretty much is almost blatant about his idea with that.
Yeah.
That so I think like the way he shows it, I think makes more sense to me if I was looking at it as spiritual and not actually me turning a piece of lead into 18 karat gold.
And we'll get into that a little later in why that kind of has now come about. It's almost like a bastardization of the origins of alchemy itself in a historical sense. So, and I think also, like with another thing that we see center to Maier's work with this is that he talks about a need for others and having like a brotherhood, even though he himself, I think, or he at least wanted to belong to one, and that essentially was like, I think what he was wanting was like a mentor as well, but he was like, you feel this essence of a constant pupil, a student, and always seeking and learning and absorbing and churning out content, this hunger, this insatiable thing to level up, to absorb, to take in, and then get better. And I think that contributes to a lot of his content that he puts out, the quality of it, because he had that type of persona.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Definitely. Thank you. We'll go on to the next person now. Michael Maier also visited Hessen-Kessel's brother-in-law, Count Ernst III of Holstein-Schuenberg. I'm even saying that. And he was born September 24th, 1569, and he died January 17th, 1622. And he was the first count of Schuenberg and Holstein-Hindenburg to earn the title of prince in 1619. However, he died in 1622 without an heir. Otto V, who was a Calvinist, succeeded Ernst. On September 11th, 1597, he married Hedwig of Hesse-Kessel at Wilmsburg, Kessel, in some other place I can't even pronounce, and the marriage remained childless. He was also a guest of Christophe Renard, which unfortunately I could not find anything about that guy. If anybody happens to have any idea who Christophe Renard might be, please let me know. He was Doctor of Laws and Town Syndic of Mulhausen, to whom he later dedicated his book Atalanta Fugiens to, however you pronounce that. And that is his emblem book with an I mentioned it before, with an alchemical theme, and it was published by Johann Theodor de Bry in Oppenheim, interesting, in 1617, and the second edition was published in 1618. And just real quick, it consists of 50 discourses with illustrations by Matthias Marian, like I had said before, each of which is accompanied by an epigrammatic verse, prose, and music to be added. It may therefore be considered an early example of multimedia, like I said before. First, Maier visited the Netherlands, where he stayed with Patriot, I don't even know how to say, Carpentarius in Rotterdam. Carpentarius had previously been the rector of a Walloon school in Norwich in 1598. Now, I just thought that was like a little interesting. And I was like, what the hell is a Walloon school? Walloons are a Gallo-Romance ethnic native to Wallonia and the immediate adjacent regions of Flanders, France, Germany, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. Walloons primarily speak languages like Belgian, French, Picard, and Walloon. Walloons are historically and primarily Roman Catholic. In modern Belgium, Walloons are, by law, termed a distinctive linguistic and ethnic community within the country.
Nice.
So I just thought it was like, it was worth mentioning that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I was just going to say that I guess I should mention most of the stuff that I pretty much found was from two people or two sites, was Furnace and the Fugue, and then Dr. Sasha Chaitow. So a lot of the stuff that you look up for Maier, it's so sparse. I mean, you really have to go in depth and look for this stuff. So just thought I'd put that out there. But basically, a lot of these scholars indicate that Atalanta Fugiens is one of the most incredible books of alchemy of the time. So there's, that to contend with as well. And it uses a lot of alchemical symbolism and in a way kind of develops its own vocabulary and alphabet and how it plays into the whole imagery of the text itself. So, and again, just to reiterate, Maier's alchemy was the ultimate initiatory pathway at the time, and just kind of keeping that in the context of the time of when he existed and how it all emerged together. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, as you can see up on the screen, Michael continued on to London, arriving in 1611 or 1612. Whether he had arrived in person or not by Christmas 1611 is unknown, but he did send, somehow they know, he did send Christmas cards to both James I and his son, Prince Henry. It was the King of Scotland as James VI from the 24th of July, 1567, and King of England and Ireland as James I from the union of the Scottish and the English crowns on the 24th of March, 1603, until his death in 1625. In 1597 to 98, James wrote The True Law of Free Monarchies and Basilicon Duran, Royal Gift, in which he argues a theological basis for monarchy. In the True Law, he sets out the divine right of kings, explaining that kings are higher beings than other men for biblical reasons. Through the highest bench is the slipperiest to sit upon. What he has said. The document proposes an absolutist theory of monarchy by which a king may impose new laws by royal prerogative, but must also pay heed to tradition and to God, who would stir up such scourges as pleases him for the punishment of wicked things. James VI authorized the Gentlemen Adventures of Fife. That was a group of 11 noble colonists, largely from Eastern Fife, awarded rights from the king, or from King James VI, to colonize the most barbarous Isle of Lewis in 1598. James wrote that the colonists were to act not by agreement with the local inhabitants, but by extirpation of Thame. Basically, they were just going to do whatever the hell they wanted.
Yeah.
Their landing at Stonaway began well, but the colonists were driven out by local forces commanded by Murdoch and Neil MacLeod. The colonists tried again in 1605 with the same result, although a third attempt in 1607 was more successful. The Statutes of Iona were enacted in 1609, which required clan chiefs to provide support for Protestant ministers to Highland parishes, to outlaw bards, to report regularly to Edinburgh to answer for their actions, and to send their heirs to Lowland Scotland to be educated in English-speaking Protestant schools. So began a process specifically aimed at the extinction of the Gaelic language, the destruction of its traditional culture, and the suppression of its bearers. Huh. And then we got, he's also composed a wedding song for the nuptials of Frederick V of Palatine to Elizabeth Stuart, daughter of James I. Here we have Frederick V. He was born the 26th of August, 1596. And he died on the November 29th, 1632. Was the Elector Palatine of the Rhine in the Holy Roman Empire from 1610 to 1623, and reigned as King of Bohemia from 1692 to 1620. The brevity of his reign in Bohemia earned him the name the Winter King. I find that interesting, the Winter King. Mm-hmm. Makes me think of Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Frederick undertook a large building campaign designed to glorify his regime. And in addition to renovations to Hildeburg Castle, mentioned above, he commissioned a courtyard garden, the Hortus Platanus, designed by English gardener Inigo Jones and French engineer Solomon de Caus. Frederick was depicted therein as Apollo and as Hercules. Politically, Frederick positioned himself as a leader of the Protestant princes in the Holy Roman Empire, and that is a defender of the liberty of the German nobles against the Catholic Matthias, Holy Roman Emperor. And now back to Michael. His first well-known book, Arcanissima? How would you?
Arcanissima.
Yeah.
Arcanissima.
Yeah, which was published in London in 1613 or 14, originally dedicated to the head of the Royal College of Physicians at the time, William Paddy. On the 7th of April in 1620, William Paddy was appointed a commissioner for the garbling tobacco. Raphael Thoris alluded to this role in his Latin eulogy on Paddy in 1626.
So let me go back to that one, Frederick. The Arcanissimo. So it's the first emblem book that Maier puts out, and you see him talking about, in a way that you know that he's talking about the Prisca Sapientia, and that was a theory that was going around at the time, and he pretty much believed that all knowledge, like all world knowledge, had been encoded in the hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt, and I think he also mentions Greece in that as well. So the Prisca Sapientia is like pristine knowledge, or it was like the movement during the Enlightenment, Renaissance. I'm getting ahead of myself. Renaissance. And it's the concept that knowledge is passed to Adam by God pre-fall. And it was transmitted through the ages and the scriptures, through the sages, and that there was like this golden chain kind of coming down through the ages, and that when, everything else had been upturned or corrupted, you had this golden thread of knowledge that was continuous, and it ran through and resurfaces when needed be. When society kind of upends itself, it's still there, and it's there for people to absorb and take a part of. During this time, which I think is also important, 1614, you have what they call the Rosicrucian Fiore, which is happening as a response to the circulation of 3 anonymous pamphlets published in Germany in the early 17th century. And I believe it was in 1614, the first one, Fama Fraternitas, I messed that up. Sorry.
Yeah, all right.
The first one was the first manifesto was published, and it was and the next ones were to follow. But it basically, this is the first time that anybody is talking about this. This has come on stage, on the world stage, really, and everyone is kind of like, "What is this?" So just to kind of put that in the background of when Arcanissimo comes on stage, and then what also is happening with Maier at the time in 1614.
Awesome. Thank you. He personally dedicated copies to a number of notables, including the Bishop of Ely and Sir Thomas Smith of the East India Company, which I find interesting. Other less notable friends included Francis Anthony. And then here we have Lancelot Andrews, who is the Bishop of Ely, or Ely, however you say it, that I mentioned before. And he was an English bishop and scholar who held high positions in the Church of England during the reigns of Elizabeth I and James I. During the James reign, Andrews served successively as Bishop of Chichester, of Ely, and of Winchester, and oversaw the translation of King James Version of the Bible, or Authorized Version. In the Church of England, he is commemorated on September 25th with a lesser festival. So I do find it interesting that he was associated with somebody who was doing that.
Yeah. I mean, he was rubbing elbows with bigwigs. Huge.
Yeah. Yeah, I just find that very interesting. And then you got Sir Thomas Smith. And he was an English merchant, politician, and colonial administrator. He was the first governor of the East India Company and treasurer of the Virginia Company from 1609 to 1620 until enveloped basically his scandal. He ended up getting busted doing stuff. The East India Company was an English and later British joint stock company founded in 1600 and dissolved in 1874. It was formed to trade in the Indian Ocean region, initially with the East Indies, the Indian subcontinent, and Southeast Asia, and later with East Asia. The company seized control of large parts of the Indian subcontinent and colonized parts of Southeast Asia and Hong Kong. At its peak, the company was the largest corporation in the world. I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
In 1580, young Smythe was admitted to freedom of the Worshipful Company of Haberdashers. And I was like, what the hell is that? And that is one of the great 12 city livery companies. It's an ancient merchant guild of London, England, associated with the silk and velvet trades. And he's also of the Worshipful Company of Skinners. And that is basically like another order for people who like skin and do furs and stuff. And it was granted a royal charter in 1327. So, and the company's motto is to God only be all glory. This guy, Smythe, he quickly rose to wealth and distinction after entering politics to augment his business. What a surprise. Smythe was made auditor for the city of London from 1597 to 1598 and was treasurer of St. Bartholomew's Hospital from 1597 to 1601. In 1597, he was briefly elected to Parliament for Aylesbury, and there he was to address the new colony's many problems. Smythe ordered the end of religious conversion of the Native Americans and the expansion of the tobacco crop.
That's nice of him.
Yeah. In 1620, Smythe was formally charged with enriching himself at the expense of the company. King James revoked the colony's charter in 1624, making it a royal colony instead. Although Smythe was held to be partly to blame, and despite the king's hatred of tobacco and desire to form a Christian empire, Smythe nonetheless retained the king's support. That's a little interesting in itself.
Wow. Yeah.
And then we got Francis Anthony, was a 16th century physician and chemist. He commenced a medical practice in London without a license from the College of Physicians, and after 6 months was called before the president of the College of Physicians. He was stopped from practice for disregarding this injunction. He was fined £5 and committed to prison, whence he was released by a warrant of the Lord Chief Justice. So that's funny. He was like out there practicing, like, I guess without a license.
Yeah. Who needs a license?
Yeah, the college, however, got him recommitted, and Anthony submitted. Being again prosecuted for the same offense and refusing to pay a heavy fine, he was kept in prison 8 months until released on petition of his wife on the grounds of poverty in 1602.
They even had repeat offenders back then?
Yo, isn't that crazy that your wife just had to write a letter and it got you out?
Yeah. That's bad.
You're like, yo, you got to get your pain game up, woman. But he continued to practice in defiance of the college, and further proceedings were threatened but not carried out, probably because Anthony had powerful friends in court. His practice consisted chiefly, if not entirely, in the prescription and sale of a secret remedy called aurum potabile, which means drinkable gold in Latin, from which he derived a considerable fortune. So you even start wondering, like, is this a snake oil salesman, you know?
Yeah.
That's some funny stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and some people say, you know, maybe because Michael Maier was considered a devout Lutheran all his life, even though, I mean, he blatantly was an occultist, that he had a strong influence on Sir Isaac Newton. He was also involved in the Rosicrucian movement that appeared around this time, which could be why he wrote his Themis Aura, which is what I'm showing right here. And the Themis Aura. Oh, by the way, if there's people who are like, you know, listening and can watch, I do highly suggest to actually watch the video, because, you know, there are slides. You know, going forward, just to be more mindful, whenever me and her are covering a topic like this, odds are it's going to be slide heavy. So if you have the chance to watch it, shut off the audio and put on the video.
Yeah. It has great images of the book. I mean, so I highly recommend.
Yeah, I try to at least show a couple of images of all the books just to give you an idea of, like, you know, just what it looked like all this.
Right.
You know, the way it's written, you know.
I like that.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, very cool. Mm-hmm. Themis Aurea is written in Latin. The title translates to the Golden Law or the Golden Themis. The book deals with the 6 laws of the Rosicrucian fraternity. The book also contains an epistle to the fraternity from some English members expressing their admiration and support.
So by this time, all the 3 Rosicrucian manifestos have been released. You have the Fama Fraternitas, 1614, Confesso Fraternitatis, Tractatus, 1615, and the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosicrucianism, 1616. Maier thought that basically, and this is a direct quote from one of the scholars, is that Maier thought this was like manna from heaven, and that this was an answer to his prayers. And he literally became obsessed with searching for this fraternity that these manifestos spoke of. And you see this kind of come forth in the Themis Aura and also the Silentium Post Clamoris that you'll talk about here in a little bit. But they were basically a response to manifestos. And I think one of them was an apologia and then the other one was something. So, yeah, I mean, So this is what's going on in the background as all this is going on.
I think they, like, you will see, like, the terminology. I thought it was funny. It's you can almost see that being done today, but with different things. But like I think they considered him a Rosicrucian apologist, or like somebody. Yeah.
And it's funny because when I first read it, I was like, he was apologizing for the Rosicrucians. What's going on? But back then, the definition of an apologia was him writing a justification for the actual manifesto, kind of like in support of. So like in science, you have manuscripts that will basically either refute a hypothesis or support a hypothesis. And so if you support a hypothesis, I think that is considered kind of like an apologia, like it's a justification or a defense of the hypothesis that you are actually surveying.
Yeah.
So.
And then here we have, we got the 6 laws of the Rosicrucian fraternity are, 1, that none of them should profess any other thing than to cure the sick, and that gratis. 2, that they should not be constrained to wear any distinct habit, but therein to follow the custom of the country. 3, that every year upon the day C, they should meet together at the house S, spiritus or write the cause of his absence. 4, every brother should look about for a worthy person who after his decease might succeed him. 5, the word CR should be their seal, mark, and character. And then 6, that the fraternity should remain secret for 100 years. These laws are intended to guide the members of the fraternity in their quest for spiritual enlightenment and the advancement of humanity.
Yeah. So this is pretty significant from Maier in that the manifestos, again, speaking of this mystical fraternity, yet no one ever saw them. And no one ever found out who they were, supposedly. And maybe that was by design. I mean, it says in the manifestos, make sure that, you keep everything secret. I believe they also indicated that they wanted you to not use your real name. Like they insisted for them to use Kabbalistic names. And that even amongst each other, that you knew each other, but you didn't know each other's name as a way to ensure secrecy. And I believe that historians agree that the fraternities came into existence after the manifestos. Now, if that's true, I know who's to refute it, right?
It's like the chicken or the egg again. It's like
right, exactly. I mean, I think Maier kind of talked about, well, there were secret societies back in Egypt and in Celtic, and that nobody really knew of back then. I think that was his apologia, was saying that it is possible that this fraternity exists, but nobody ever found evidence of them. So I think that was the discord between what was being said back then and then so forth. But what's interesting is that so you have these manifestos. They speak of a fraternity. And it's almost like after the publication and dispersal of these manifestos, they spark the inspiration to create fraternities. And that, that it's weird, like the manifesto manifested, the actual fraternity, or they believed it into existence, and you have this new way of thinking. You bring society out of the way that the whole religious turmoil, whatever's going on, and it kind of pulls it forward into this like new era, new way of thinking. So I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah,
So.
you actually pretty much took the words right out of my mouth, too.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's great.
Oh, okay,
that's great,
good.
because I do think it's very, it is interesting to, like, the whole thing with the chicken and the egg again. There are some people who do think that, like, Rosicrucianism may have been like an idea and then eventually formed into, I guess, kind of like people eventually turned into something. But originally when it was out, it was almost like I could see maybe some people, it's almost like maybe a way of a format of publishing occultism. Or like almost so like a structure, or to talk about it or to publish it and to see like other people who, other people who've already had experiences will understand what they're reading, maybe. It
was almost like they inserted into the zeitgeist of the early 1600s, and they were hoping that they could push society into this better way than it was already going. Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate exactly what you said, but yeah.
It's very interesting stuff.
I think so too.
The 1656 English translation of Themis Aura appeared as the Laws of the Fraternity of the Rosy Cross and was dedicated to Elias Ashol. Now, Elias Ashol, he was an English antiquary, politician, officer of arms, astrologer, and student of alchemy. His library includes work on English history, law, alchemy, astrology, astronomy, and botany. I find that interesting, the botany.
Again,
yeah,
with the botany.
He was one of the founding fellows of the Royal Society, a key institution in the development of experimental science. Sounds a lot like other things I've talked about, and they were into botany, too.
Yeah.
He was a Freemason, and throughout his life was an avid collector of curiosities and other artifacts. Sounds familiar, too. Many of these he acquired from the traveler, botanist, and collector John Tradescant the Younger. Ashol donated most of his collection, his antiquarian library, and priceless manuscripts to the University of Oxford to create the Ashmolean Museum. His diary entry for the 16th of October in 1646 reads in part, "I was made a Freemason at Warrington in Lancashire with Colonel Henry Mainwaring of Corringham of Cheshire." And then on the 10th of March that year, he wrote, "I received the summons to appear at a lodge to be held the next day at Mason's Hall in London." The following day, March 11th, in 1682, he wrote, "Accordingly, I went. I was the senior fellow among them. We all dined at the Half Moon Tavern in Cheapside at a noble dinner prepared at the charge of the new accepted Masons." That's funny. Because even in the OTO, as you start going up in degrees, like, you have to start bringing in the food for the end of the
really?
Yeah, you have to start making the food and bringing it. I was like, yo, what happened? I thought people were cooking for me.
No. You
like,
also have to become a chef.
It's like, yo, I got to pay and feed you? I got to pay for the initiation, and I got to bring in food and feed you now.
That's not a way to treat people.
Yeah, it's just almost like, again, these are like the multiple little things that's just like, at least see how far these people are willing to go to keep going up. I don't know.
It's horrible.
Yeah. And one thing I would like to, I think is worth mentioning, we've pretty much already said this already, before getting into his books, because I will be kind of like going into a little bit more of his books now. The whole Rosicrucian, like, inception and stuff. The inception was declared across Europe by the publication of the anonymous manifestos, the Fama, remember, you couldn't even say this before.
Yeah.
Fraternity, too many Tituses in there. Fame of the Fraternity in 1614, the Confessio Fraternitatis, Confession of the Fraternity, and then the Fama one, was circulating in manuscript form in the cities of Kessel and Marburg, centers of an intellectual activity within the Hessian state of Moritz the Learned, from at least July of 1611. This was advertised in the catalogs of Leipzig and Frankfurt book fairs as, I don't even know how to say this, but it was a classification followed by the chief English Rosicrucian apologist Robert Flood. Somebody else that I did mention that I wanted to cover as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he was somebody who did a lot of emblems as well. Mm-hmm. This classification reflects the fact that the first printing of the Fama, whatever, was made at Hessel with the express consent of Moritz. So the guy that Maier was associating with, odds are, is the person who allowed and helped produce one of the Rosicrucian books that was coming out at the time.
Right. Which is interesting.
Yeah.
So I did a little digging in terms of like, okay, what were these manifestos talking about, or what, kind of the context of it. And so the first one, the Fama one, it introduces this idea of a secret fraternity, and it's founded by a person that they named Christian Rosicrucians, who went on a journey to the east, spoke with sages, gained wisdom of the lost knowledge of antiquity, and brought it back to Europe. And his teachings had been hidden in a burial vault and then been discovered, opened, and then it marks the beginning of a new age, the manifestos, and so forth. The second manifesto reiterates the same storyline. It kind of goes through the same thing all over again, but it includes a promise of a better world and ending papal tyranny. So I guess they were anti-Catholic in my sense, right? You want to end papal tyranny. You're talking about maybe possibly doing away with Catholicism. The third manifesto is the Chemical Wedding. It's full of alchemical symbolism, and it's a separate, completely manifesto in that it kind of leaves out the two storylines of the previous two manifestos and has more of an allegorical narrative. It's considered a favorite among most alchemists for the mysteries it contains within the text itself. So to this day, nobody knows who wrote the manifestos. I think the last one has been linked to a Johann Valentin Andre. And what was interesting about this, because we talked about how like the second one talked about ending papal tyranny, the response to it was both, the apologia, which was in support, and then the attacks. But most of the attacks came from the Protestant thinkers. And like the Catholics didn't really care about it. They kind of didn't even bother with it. And the way that the historians measure this is that more attacks in literature came out of the Protestant thinkers, whereas hardly any literature came out of the Catholic thinkers. So they kind of measured it against that the Catholics pretty much weren't bothered by it, I guess, so to speak. And then you see the doctrine basically being alchemical within the manifestos, and they emphasize having a secret doctrine and being passed down, kind of like that whole golden chain that we talked about earlier. And this idea of alchemy became central to Rosicrucian thought through Michael Maier. And it based it all on historical material. So when you think about Rosicrucian alchemy, you think Michael Maier. That's who basically was the one that brought, if anything, brought it into Western Europe. So, and basically Rosicrucian thought the center of it was alchemy, medicine, heliocentrism. So, yeah, ancient wisdom.
Yes. Thank you very much for that. I think I probably will just do a couple of books just to get up to like the first slide of books. Unfortunately, I think like the first 2 or 3 books that I might cover briefly here, I don't have slides for them either because I couldn't find them, or I was just not happy with like showing something that just looked like a black and white photocopy. Again, I mentioned before, I try to show the slides so you can actually see like the color of the paper, the color of the ink and all that stuff. So some things I may not have shown because it just like lacked that for me. But I'll try to get us up to at least maybe the first slide with one of the books, and then we'll probably wrap it up there just to keep the time down so it's easier for everybody else to listen as well as for us. So one of his books, Hymnosophia, is also the title of a musical alchemical work by Count Michael Maier. Hymnosophia is a term that means the wisdom of hymns, or the knowledge of sacred songs. It is derived from the Greek words hymnos, meaning a song of praise, and Sophia, meaning wisdom or knowledge. Hymnosophia, published in 1618, is a collection of 50 hymns dedicated to various gods, goddesses, heroes, and philosophers of ancient Greece and Egypt. Each hymn is accompanied by a commentary that explains its alchemical meaning and symbolism. Maier intended his work to be a guide for the spiritual alchemist who seeks to purify his soul and attain the divine. Like, even this sounds very much like the other book we're going to get into.
Yes.
And, like, I even do think is like another thing, too. But some of these older books, I do think the engravings were already used, and he's reusing them again in Atalanta. You know, I don't think that is like the first time all that stuff pops up. That's just my opinion. From looking at some of his older stuff, it looks like to me the same art and almost the same ideas, but that was like all put together in the other book. I could be wrong.
No. It might have been something
and
like
that could also be another reason why I didn't want to show the copies of these books, because for all I know, it's wrong. You know? Right.
But it almost seems like it was comprehensive on the Fugiens. It was a comprehensive work. Yeah.
Maier's Hymnosophia was a unique and ambitious attempt to combine music, alchemy, and spirituality in a single work. It was also a reflection of his quest for pansophia, or universal wisdom, which he hoped to achieve through the integration of various fields of knowledge. I find that interesting because Thelema is kind of a lot like that. Pulls from different places. And Crowley was very big into pen, you know, so. And, you know, I think it may have been Hildegard, or no, there was somebody, maybe it was Mary the Jewess, somebody that we covered. I remember she said something about alchemy and the metal needing to be the thickness of a frying pan.
I think it was Jewess, Mary Jewess.
And I do think that the pan could possibly be our lens. You know, and I just, you know, I even think Eopan and all that, you know.
Yeah.
My opinion. Knox, you know, the optic nerve and the crossing, NOx. And you start getting into Crowley. So, like, what I'm getting at, getting off the topic here, is that sometimes I, like, do wonder about influences. You know, or some of the newer occultists that everybody talks about, where they just pulling from other ones, like this man.
Right.
Yeah. Michael's hymns were intended to be sung by 4 voices, accompanied by musical instruments, and performed in a circular space. Maier believed that music had power to harmonize the elements, purify the soul, and reveal the secrets of nature. I'm not going to read too much of this. I did have a lot more written down that I probably will read. But here is an example of one of Maier's hymns addressed to Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary founder of alchemy and the patron of the Rosicrucians. Hermes Trismegistus, thrice greatest sage, who taught the secrets of the stars and earth, and who wrote them down in the books of sacred worth, you are the father of the art and age. You gave to us the stone, the water and fire, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 7, the principles that rule below in heaven, and how to change the base to what we desire. I just wanted to give people kind of an idea of, like, again, that's what translation. Yeah. So, you know. At one point, I will mention this part I think is interesting. He says, you revealed to us the mystery of the rose, the circle, the cross, the circle, and the square, the vessel, the furnace, and the air, and how to find the medicine in the clothes. I think that just kind of sounds interesting.
I like that.
Yeah, the circle. Yeah. This is like a lot of, that's like even another thing too, why I wanted to cover Robert Flood and Matthias, is because, like, those are even people that you will see their engravings used constantly. Like, even like other shows, or like other people who like cover stuff, like, you know, I guess like to like look for alchemical whatever, or maybe they know what they're doing anyway. But like they have like engravings that I think like people will be like, oh wow, like I've seen that before. I've seen that before. Oh, I've seen that before. It goes back to this. You know, it was even like I was like seeing art that I was like, I've seen this plenty of times before. Had no idea that originally was drawn by this person and was in this book. You know, it was really
almost like that golden thread.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It like takes you all throughout because they all use that same theme all across. And it sticks into your psyche that you're like, I've seen this before.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Powerful images. You
Yeah.
remember them.
Absolutely. And you don't think they are. I mean, because they seep in.
Yes.
So.
And then we got, what do I got here? Arcanasimia. That was 1614. And that's supposed to be the most secrets. The book consists of 6 parts, each dealing with a different aspect of the Egyptian Greek hieroglyphs. The first part explains the origin and the nature of the hieroglyphs. The second part analyzes. The second part analyzes the symbols of the gods and goddesses. The third part explores the symbols of the heroes and the animals. The fourth part examines the symbols of the institutions and rites. The fifth part discusses the symbols of the elements and metals, and the sixth part reveals the symbols of the alchemical process and the philosopher's stone. The book is illustrated with engravings and diagrams, and it also contains poems, riddles, and musical compositions by Maier. It is considered one of his most important and influential works, and it has been studied by scholars of alchemy, mythology, and history. Now, this, if I'm saying it right, mythoalchemy was popularized by Michael Maier. Mythoalchemy is a term that refers to a literary genre that interprets ancient myths as allegories of alchemical process, which I'm thinking is kind of like what we've almost kind of been talking about before, how I don't think this guy is like literally talking about turning like your stones into like jewelry. He's talking about like there's an actual like chemical, it's within the self. I think this is a way of saying it's allegorical, or
Allegorical, yeah.
Yeah, or archetypes, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that the stories of gods and heroes and monsters contain hidden symbols and secrets of natural philosophy and the art of transmutation. Some examples of mytho-alchemical interpretations are the story of Atalanta and the Hippopennies as a metaphor for the union of mercury and sulfur, the two main principles of alchemy. The story of Jason and the Golden Fleece as a symbol of the quest for the Philosopher's Stone, the ultimate goal of alchemy. And the story of Hercules and the Hydra as an illustration of the multiplication of metals, a technique of alchemy.
And like you had said, it's basically his creation. The Arcanissimo is Maier's alchemical interpretation of mythology. And so you kind of personify into an alchemical like setting. And it sets the stage, again, setting the stage for his later works, which is the later emblem books, and introduces discussion of an alchemical significance to the Greco-Egyptian hieroglyphs. And it pretty much lays the foundation to what he began to began to outline it as a mytho-alchemical project or mythoalchemy. So yeah, he pretty much said it, like if anything created it, that whole concept in and of itself. I think there's the website or the blog, Furnace and Fugue, they kind of go into it pretty good. I thought they did a really good job on the Arcanissima, and they kind of talk about how when Maier is talking about the differences between like paganism and Christianity, he's very careful to go and discuss both of them, but he still kind of shows this emphasis on that there is a value in chemical secrets lying behind the myths itself. And then reminds the audience that you need to not take these histories as literal, but allegorical, like you had mentioned. Like the hieroglyphs, tales of concealing some deeper meaning, philosophical or moral. So yeah, I mean, he's kind of, to me, it's almost like, how we talked about gematria having like 3 different levels or 3 different facets to them. I feel like that's kind of what he's saying with with alchemy in and of itself. You have the practical sense, you have the intellect, and then you also have the spiritual itself. And if you think about it, it's kind of like the triad, the Trinity, yourself, like your body, mind, and spirit. So, and working with all three, not leaving any of them out. So, yeah.
I think, I don't know if it ever came out of Maier's or if he ever, wrote it down, but I do think Ficino and a couple of other people that I had came across when I was, when we were researching this guy, I even started going off into other rabbit holes and had to come back. But, I did notice from a few people that was around in this time that they kind of, some of them, were literally saying, it's the humanists who are screwing up stuff. It's their take on this alchemy or occultism or spirituality that is actually, corrupting kind of the original idea.
Yes.
In my opinion, at that point, it's because, they're, taking what these people are saying. These aren't literal gods. This story in itself is telling you an alchemical change.
Right.
This is all allegory. Right. And these people are no, this
is an actual... Yeah.
Persona.
It's almost like they attempted to personify the alchemical process, and people got it wrong and thought that it was an actual person.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe they were being poetic. Maybe they were trying to be, all kinds of literary, insightful or allegorical, and then people turned it around and said, no, this is...
don't understand, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the wrong way.
Yeah.
It's very much like a lot of me and Headless have talked about that a lot, actually. This personification. Me and him kind of go on about how you got to undo that. And you'll start seeing things, I think, deeper. We'll get into this book. Maybe we'll go into maybe one or two more. But I could finally get to a slide here. This one, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this, but you translate it on to English. On the physical circle, squared, that is, on gold and its medicinal virtue, hidden under a hard shell like a kernel, whether and what and what kind of benefit can be attained from it, a not useless treatise. Jeez. According to various sources, the book was first published in 1616 in Frankfurt, Germany. The book is about the philosophical and medical aspects of gold and its relation to the alchemical concept of the squaring of the circle. The book is written in Latin and contains many illustrations and symbols related to alchemy. The book was influential in the history of alchemy, and it was one of the sources that inspired later alchemists such as Elias Ashol and Isaac Newton. The book also contains some musical compositions that are based on the alchemical principles of harmony and perfection. The book is considered a rare and valuable work of art and science. It has been reprinted several times, and most recently in 2018.
The Secrela was the scientific work predominantly based on Pythagoreanism.
See, that was something I meant to say before, and I think I just got lost or forgot. When you were talking about, I think, how much he was even influenced by that stuff. Again, just even going back to when I was joking around about ICP and the guy saying Michael Myers and psycho ciphers and stuff. You do have to start, even wondering could that idea of numerology also help understand what you're reading in his stuff?
Yes. Well, I mean, we covered that where Pythagoras came up with isopsephy. Yeah. So, I mean, it's all coded.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Then we have, I like this one, Lucius Serious, or however you pronounce this, is a Latin phrase that means serious play or serious pastime. It is also the title of it's the title of the book written by Michael Maier. The book is a philosophical discourse about the superiority of creatures under man, in which 8 representatives from the animal, vegetable, and mineral kingdoms compete to prove their usefulness to mankind. I find it just very interesting that 8. The contestants are a calf, a sheep, a goose, an oyster, a bee, a silkworm, a flax, and Mercury, the alchemical element and not the planet or the god. The book is composed of dialogues between each representative and a human judge who eventually crowns Mercury as the king of all worldly things under man's command. The book is considered a rare and valuable work of early modern science and philosophy, as it reflects Maier's views on alchemy, natural history, and human nature. It also contains illustrations and symbols related to alchemy and mysticism. The book was first published in Latin in 1616 and later translated into English in 1654 by John Hall, a poet and translator. It had some influence and inspiration on other writers and thinkers, especially in the fields of alchemy, philosophy, and literature. And some examples are Isaac Newton, the famous physicist and mathematician, was also interested in alchemy and studied Maier's works, including Lucius Sirius, and even copied some passages from the book in his own notebooks.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Elias Ashol, who I mentioned before, the English astrologer, was also an avid reader of Maier's writings. He collected and published several of Maier's works in his Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum, a compendium of alchemical texts. John Hall, I mentioned before, the English poet and translator, was the first to render Lucius Sirius into English under the pseudonym J. de la Salle. He also wrote a preface and a poem praising Maier and his book. And another person interesting to mention, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, however you say is that name. The German writer and statesman was influenced by Maier's allegorical style and symbolism in his own works, such as Faust and Wilhelm Meister. All right, and then we'll cover the next one, and then we'll wrap it up after that, I think. Silentium post clamors is a Latin phrase that means silence after clamors and silence after the noise. Rather interesting. Silence, the sign of silence. It is also the title of a book written by Michael Maier. The book is an apologetic treatise. I love how they name it that. The book is an apologetic treatise that defends the reasons for the revelations and the silence of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, a mystical and secret society that claimed to possess esoteric knowledge. The book published in 1617, was published in 1617, and contains many symbolic illustrations and allegories. Supposedly, the engravings illustrate the alchemical process and philosophical principles of the Rosicrucians. He argued that true wisdom of alchemy was hidden from the unworthy and the vulgar, and that only those who were initiated into the mysteries could understand and practice it.
Yeah, Maier and his predecessors were pretty strict, or they kind of came down hard on people doing alchemy just for the purpose of either getting rich or just making gold or just using one of the three, not all three. And they kind of considered it like the worst thing you could possibly do. They even said it was unethical. And they didn't even consider those people alchemists back in the day. If you were only doing one of the dimensions of alchemy, so to speak, kind of like if you're only doing spiritual, they don't consider you an alchemist. Or you're only doing gold making, they don't consider you an alchemist. And then you go back to, like we talked about, the 18 steps. That first step, you have to know your why. You have to have self-awareness, and you can't be vulgar. And then, again, doing the work itself. And I think it was a journey of discovery of all three: the practical, intellect, and spiritual. Or it just wasn't alchemy.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think we have one more slide that I'll show from this book. Then I'll let you wrap it up after I say this. Okay. He also claimed that the Rosicrucians had a divine mission to reform the world and to prepare for the second coming of Christ. Wow. The book is considered influential in the history of alchemy and the occult, and it has revealed some of the secrets and symbols of the Rosicrucians and also refuted some of their critics.
Yeah, speaking of reforming the world, one of the main thoughts, I think they said within the Rosicrucian manifestos, and that Maier tends to emphasize throughout most of his work, was that the primary goal should be healing of the sick of grief and anger. I found that very interesting, that those were the two that he mentions.
Like, even, you know, that was a thing that went through my head when I was even looking at the stuff that I had. That's, you know, that doesn't necessarily state if that's physical or if that's mental.
Yes, exactly. And knowing Maier, it probably was mental. Not just the surface of what he was talking about. Yeah.
I find that very interesting. Yeah. But, yeah, that is the, I guess we'll stop there, like I said. I think we'll wrap it up there. We'll have a couple of other books to go into, at least, I think a few more, actually. And then we'll pretty much focus on, like, that other book, Atalanta. And, yeah, and I do have, like, some things that I'll pull, you know, statements about Myers, or, like, you know, what other people have said about him or whatever. You know, I have a few things like that. And interesting, I will have, if I remember to do it, which I hope I do have some of the music too. So that should be making it interesting. Yeah, with some of the emblems, I will play a couple of them. I will play some of the music that is supposedly supposed to be played with it. So it'll be interesting for the next one as well for that.
That'd be really
I think
cool.
Some of the music is actually pretty wild. I have two different versions. One where it sounds like almost like you're playing Castlevania from like Nintendo.
Oh, that's
And then there's like one where I think it's got like all the split up like different voices and stuff, and you're like, yo, this is wild, yeah. So it'll be pretty cool to, I think, to add.
One thing, let me just add this one thing. I think that one of the inspirations for Bach's 3 voice trio or 4 voice trios that's included in the Golden Record that supposedly was sent out into space was inspired by Maier.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I thought I found that last minute and I was like, oh wow, talk about.
Well, I mean, I've even said before, said to you, I was like, you know, what's the difference if it's like I took some of this guy's music or I took some of Hildegard's music? You know,
who's gonna know?
You took the notes and just like you put that through like, you know, a synthesizer or like you know, like a beat machine or a sampler or whatever. You know, you could start ripping off that stuff easily.
Yeah.
And I've like wondered, has it been done already?
Yeah. Well, you know how like
because I can't be the first idiot to think of that.
No, it can't be. And like what you were saying about like some kind of, you know, symbol that you've seen in the past, you're like, oh, I've seen this before. If you did that with music and people have heard it before, imagine how catchy it would be. And people would latch onto it and not know why, because it's already in their psyche.
Yeah, well, I mean, not to get into it, but even when it comes to music, I mean, there's even like a certain structures that they know that just catch people.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and certain even, you know, I think it's like kind of like almost prevalent like throughout the Beatles, like the certain way of structure, it's just very catchy and grips the ears. Yeah. So, yeah. Thank you very much, Elisa, for coming on and covering that. That went great. I had a lot of fun, actually. It went a lot better than I expected. So thank you very much. Very interesting topic, and I'm very happy to be doing it, you know. And, you know, I hope there's, like, things in here that lead people to go, like, you know, these other names and these other people I'm talking about, you know, these engravers and stuff. Don't wait for me to cover them, you know. Go look down these rabbit holes of these people and see what they're interested in. It's pretty wild and very interesting.
Yes.
You know, there's plenty and of stuff that I actually could have went into more, both of us, but it was just like, you know, at some point it's like, you know, are you beating a dead horse? So
right.
Didn't want to overload too much and just give it a general idea of who Count Michael Myers was. Very interesting fellow, and just that name, very interesting, and the music and everything makes you wonder, you know. How influential could he have been, and we don't even realize it. Thank you again, and that will be end of episode 1. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.